I'm going to get started. So I'm Rob Pardo. I'm the Executive Vice President of Game Design at Blizzard Entertainment. And thanks, Connie. And hopefully the presentation looks as awesome as it's supposed to, but it's the resolution's a little off. So we'll see how well we do with some of the graphics. All right. So what this talk is really about, we did this, this talk is really a talk that I intend to do for Blizzard. And I decided to do the talk at GDC because I knew if I had to do a talk in front of all of you, it would force me to actually get this talk done, where if I'm just doing it, for my guys, then maybe I would take a couple years to finally get it done. But the point of this talk is we kind of took the premise of, like there's lots of companies out there that have core values around, what their company is about and what they believe in. And I kind of took the premise of if the Blizzard design department was its own company, what would our core values be? So that was kind of the exercise and really what this talk is about. And the thing that is one of the big takeaways for you guys is not to just adopt all the Blizzard values, because the Blizzard values may not make sense for your studio or for the game that you're making. The big takeaway is, maybe you learn a few things from the Blizzard values, but more importantly, you might want to do the exercise yourself at your own studio or for your own department. Really trying to figure out what is it that you believe in, what do you think that's important in games, and especially if your studio is bigger and you have a larger design department, I think it'll be really helpful so that everyone's kind of on the same page and know what kind of the core philosophies of your studio is. And then, lastly, it's again, the values that I'm going to show you guys, these are not the values you need to be successful. I think one of the things that's great about the game industry is that we have such a wide range of cool, innovative games and different sort of games. So, really come up with your own values and you can be just successful. Okay, so the first value that I have is gameplay first. So gameplay first also happens to be one of the Blizzard Entertainment values. And really what this is kind of always saying is we want to concentrate the game on the fun. I think there's probably some studios that really like to push the technology and their gameplay mechanics come out of that. I think we're more kind of the inverse of that. We really want to make sure that what is the fun mechanics, what is the fun in the game, and really concentrate on that and make sure that all the other disciplines, be it, art or programming or game design, really are focused on the gameplay. Really trying to make that first. And one of the problems I think with this value is people kind of assume that this means game design first. But I think game design is just as susceptible to come up with really cool ideas where the designers have the fun rather than ideas where the players have the fun. I think, especially like, let's say in MMO development, we might come up with a really cool boss encounter where the boss encounter is like really complicated and really intricate, and we think, we're being really clever as designers, but in reality, the players have no idea what's going on and they just come up with some exploit and play it, and it becomes not about the players having fun, but us as designers trying to come up with really cool puzzles and making players kind of jump through our hoops and through our mazes. So here's like an example I would use. In Warcraft 3, we had the Night Elf race, and we had, one of the core units were druids. And within the lore, we really kind of had this distinguishing factor that only Night Elves could be druids, and within the Night Elf race, only males could be druids. We kind of had all the females were the fighters, very much kind of like Amazons. And that was like part of the lore for Warcraft 3. So if you see all the units that are druids, it's only Night Elf males. But when we went to World of Warcraft, we really had to change the lore, because like I was talking to Chris Metzen, during the World of Warcraft development, and he was really hardcore about it. He's like, no, we can't change the lore. And it's like, well, do you want druids as a class or not? Because we're not going to have a class in a massively multiplayer game, one of our 9 classes that you only can play with one race and one gender choice. So, he decided to bend and realize, druids are more important, the gameplay is more important, so he changed the lore to really accommodate, Taurens and Night Elves to be druids also, and Night Elf females. Another lore example was, we had this cool idea within the original World of Warcraft where paladins would be on the Alliance side and shamans would be on the Horde side. But the problem was that as the game played out, the classes became more and more similar. And one of the big values we had in the game was that we wanted each class to be as different from one another as possible. We really wanted diverse gameplay. We wanted shamans to feel really, really different from paladins, but because the two sides had to be balanced also, we increasingly kind of would go, well, paladins have this ability, so we better come up with some sort of offshoot ability that shamans can have that do something similar. So we finally made the choice of, again, kind of that gameplay first concept, and decided to change the lore to bring in shamans and paladins into the opposing factions. And that was, a lot of times I think in design you end up with trade-offs like that, where you really have to make those hard decisions of what's more important. Is it more important kind of that cool factor and that lore that the classes were on opposing sides, or do you want to make a choice where, class diversity and class differentiation is more important? So the next one I'm going to talk about is easy to learn, difficult to master. I think this is a value that really most studios probably have. Core of games, I think, really have this concept. So obviously, this is not something that's unique to Blizzard. I kind of have a couple of bullet points here that I think, just describe the basics of what easy to learn, difficult to master means. Early gameplay should be simple mechanics and obvious objectives. And as the game progresses, provide players with challenges that scales to the ability of the player. Simple stuff. But I did want to kind of modify it a little bit for Blizzard. And I feel like our value is slightly different, and this is really easy to learn and almost impossible to master, and this is kind of a screenshot of a raid in WoW. And a lot of this comes out of the fact that at Blizzard, almost all of our games now really are multiplayer games first. We really want to provide hundreds of hours of entertainment. And if you want to do that, you really have to have a game that has an extraordinary amount of depth. Otherwise, players are going to eventually get bored of it. And it was kind of interesting, too, that I remember, when we shipped World of Warcraft, almost everybody was like, oh, World of Warcraft, is better because they dumbed everything down. And actually, WoW is a pretty hardcore game. It just happens to also be a much more accessible game than some of the other games. But, players, within WoW, once you get to kind of that end game, there's hundreds of hours of gameplay and raids, 25 players, originally 40 players. We have PvP battlegrounds, arena teams, we have all this incredibly hardcore stuff. And, designing all that depth, is really important to us. So now I'm going to use some examples of where I don't think we did as good a job with really trying to have that depth and that hard to master, which is kind of the Diablo 2 economy. So in Diablo 2, we felt the economy works pretty well. Pretty much when you go through to kill Diablo the first time, you kind of your money intake's kind of matching how much you spend, and all kind of works out pretty well. But once you kind of get into those escalated difficulty modes, money quickly kind of becomes meaningless, and you just don't even know what to do with your money, and you just start gambling it away on vendors and everything else. Another problem we had was, we had kind of this built-in tax. Every time you died, you would lose half your gold, which was a great way to kind of, punish players and incentivize them, and also a way to kind of balance the economy a little bit. The problem was that all you had to do to escape this penalty was drop all your gold in town and then run off an adventure, take as many depths you want, and then every time you town portaled back, just pick up your gold and spend it. And then lastly, because gold didn't have meaning, once, the kind of the multiplayer game went out there, you'd find that players just stopped using gold as their economy. They started using Stones of Jordan, which was one of the most powerful items in the game, and they would just trade Stones of Jordan for different items. Like, oh, you have this item, so I'll trade you two Stones of Jordan for it, which obviously was not something that we intended, as designers. It's just something that evolved. So, we tried to take those lessons into the World of Warcraft economy and try to figure out what could we do better to balance that economy, purely as game design. So we definitely manage the income much more carefully. We spend a lot more time really trying to figure out what is an average gold income level, how much should you be spending on talent or on skills and spells, how much should you be spending on weapon skills, how much should you be spending on gear and items, all these sorts of things. The durability system, we thought about quite a bit, and obviously there's a durability system in Diablo 2 also, but again, we didn't really try to balance it that carefully as we did in WoW. In WoW, we put a lot of design hooks in there, very specific, to make sure that the amount of durability that you paid for kind of scaled with how powerful your items were. And really the theory on this was that we knew that once players kind of got to that end game and started doing raids, that players would have really elite items, which would therefore be taxed more through durability, and those players were dying more. So it really ended up being one of the biggest things that helped balance the economy for WoW when we first shipped. And then, we really talk a lot about money sinks, which is a designery term, obviously. I don't think players, when they buy, the big, huge, woolly mammoth, think of it as a money sink. They think of it as something that they can really build up and buy. But you really want to make sure that you have those luxury items, you have those things that people can still strive for and save their money for, and has a way of, if players accumulate a lot of gold, there should always be more things that they could buy if they so choose. And then lastly, we put in the whole auction house design, knowing that the player economy would also be a huge way to kind of keep our economy balanced and be a way that gold will always go, kind of be leaving the system. So the next thing about easy to learn, difficult to master is a really counterintuitive point, which is the fact that we oftentimes build the depth first. This is the thing that's much harder to do. It takes much longer, but even though it's counterintuitive, I see all these studios, because I see all these studios out there, they'll build their single-player game. They'll spend 2 years on their single-player game. In the last 3 months, let's just slap on multiplayer. Thinking that, well, that's the thing we just kind of do at the end. The single-player thing must be harder. But it should make a little more sense that you should do it the other way around. And the reason for that is that, let's say you have a single-player game, that's going to be a 10-hour experience. Maybe if you're a Final Fantasy, it might be a 70-hour experience, but it's somewhere in that realm. But if you look at a multiplayer game that lasts for, let's say, months or years to a player, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of hours. So just think about the development time. I mean, if you want to design something that's going to be out there for hundreds and hundreds of hours, don't you think it might take more development time to make that than something that you're only expecting to last for 10 to 30 hours? So, and examples where we do that is StarCraft 2. We actually had the multiplayer game up and playable for, years really before we started on the single player. And that was the thing that we really wanted up and running first, because we knew getting the right units in the game, making sure that they're balanced, making sure they're the right type of units, that's actually really, really hard to do well. And the single-player game can take advantage of all those sorts of things and really be built on top of it much more cleanly. Where if you go the other direction, you could oftentimes end up with single-player units that were really powerful and awesome, but really don't cleanly fit into a balance matrix that's fun. So that's one of the reasons why we do it kind of the opposite way of a lot of people. And class design was another really good example. And wow, we really designed the classes, and we designed what the classes do and made them fun before we ever worried about how are we going to teach you the mechanics, or what is your level 1 warrior abilities. That was something that we worried about much later. And so then it's accessibility second. So user interface is a great accessibility tool, right? That's one of the ways that you can take a really complex idea or deep idea or mechanic and then turn it into something that's much more accessible if you do your user interface right. Now, obviously, even when you're early on, you have to have user interface. So I'm not saying don't do your user interface at all first. It's just that this is your big tool towards accessibility. And then, the other good example is single player within StarCraft 2, which I was talking about, which is we did that after the multiplayer. So the next value I want to talk about is what is the fantasy? So, like when you look at this character up here, this is a Draenei Paladin. Just from looking at that image, I think most people probably have a fantasy in their mind of what that guy might play like. What are my game mechanics? And, even though my whole PowerPoint really just deals with Blizzard examples, because again, this is, primarily going to be a Blizzard talk, but I think other really good examples of what is the fantasy sort of things is, like something like Guitar Hero, when you imagine being a rock star, or something like God of War where you see that picture of Kratos on the box, like immediately just as a gamer, you have a visceral kind of reaction to what do you think that character is going to be capable of and what they're going to be able to do. In the case of Paladins, they really are they're a healer and a savior. So, when you kind of look at this and you kind of imagine what it's like for like a doctor in an ER that can actually save lives. What an incredible rush, what an incredible feeling to be able to do that. So, you kind of just imagine what that gameplay might be. But, the problem for us is that that's not really how it turned out. It more turned out like this is a screenshot of a raid healer in WoW. Which, that's not quite what we thought the game was going to turn into, and we kind of messed up on this value with this particular class, right? That's not the fantasy. So that's a fail. All right, so let's talk about another failed example. So the original StarCraft, we had heroes in the single player. We had this concept of, you play these heroic story-based units that help drive the story and really kind of had cool gameplay. And you kind of have this expectation again of they're the most powerful unit on the field. They lead armies into battles, and they could turn the tide of a battle, right? That would be your fantasy of playing, a heroic character in an army game. The problem was that it didn't quite play like that either. Heroes ended up being very fragile units. StarCraft is a game about mass armies. And then the player would lose if these guys died. So what you would do, like if you look up on the screenshot, the little circle there is actually your hero, and you kind of sit him in the back of your base and hope desperately that the computer AI doesn't kill your unit while you're off doing something else, because then you would lose. So that's another fail. Okay, so where we got it right. So I feel like we really learned a lot from the StarCraft experience, and when we made Warcraft 3, we really thought a long time about what is the fantasy of playing, a hero within an RTS game. So we put a lot more things in there. We made sure they're a powerful unit. We actually very intentionally kept the army sizes down for Warcraft 3. I think there was some accusations and some parts that somehow our graphics engine couldn't handle more units, but it was driven from the design from the beginning. It was all based around the idea of we wanted to make a game that centered on heroes, an RTS game that centered on it. So we knew that we wanted to keep the army sizes smaller so that therefore the heroes would be a more meaningful part of the battle. And then probably the most important thing that we did was we got away from this concept of if your hero dies that he stays dead and you lose the game. We put in the whole idea of alters, where if your hero dies, then you just got to pay, it's just a time penalty and a money penalty before you can bring them onto the battlefield again. But it really succeeded where Warcraft 3, you really needed to have your heroes onto the battlefield to win, and they really turned the tide of battle, and you certainly did not hide them in the back of your base. All right, next value. Make everything overpowered. So very much a Blizzard value, I think, and some other studios probably believe in this too. But, we kind of want to take everything to an 11. Just every unit, every class, everything in the game that we can think of. We just want it to feel like this unit or this class can't be stopped. That's the feeling we want to give. And then ideally, if we do our jobs well, it actually is really balanced. Because the next class you play, you're like, wow, this one's even more powerful than the last one, and this one's even cooler than that one. That's really the feeling we want to give you. And then kind of this idea up here that it doesn't cost anything extra to make something epic. And what I mean by that is, if you look at this shot, this is a smaller model that we uniform scaled up until it was much more epic. And this one thing that happened, it was kind of funny during World of Warcraft development. We had a little island that sits off of the main coastline that's called Designer Island. And this is where, the designers could just pop in, and we had all the vendors there and all the equipment, and it was just kind of flat plains, and it's where we did all of our tests. And, I remember when they put one of our first dragons into the game, and I just felt that dragon was a little bit wimpy. It was like 5 times the size of a player, and I'm just like, what the fuck? The thing's got to be a little bit bigger. So I got the programmers to give me a special spell that I could load into my action bar. It was a shrink spell and a grow spell. And it would either shrink or grow whatever thing I cast it on by 10%. So I just, I brought a Nefarian into the game, one of our dragons, and I think I must have pressed that grow spell like 20 times. And then I'm like, okay, that's where you want to be. And I don't know why they gave me the shrink spell, because I never have used it to this day. All right, so, and it also kind of applies to story and world for us. It's like, if any of you guys know anything about the lore of Blizzard, the lore of kind of our different worlds and universes, all of our main characters, they're 50 feet tall, and if something happened in the past, it happened 10,000 years ago, right? What's the point of something happening 5 years ago or a guy being 8 feet tall? Just go for it. That's very much kind of what this value is about. And then, last thing I would say that's really important, with this value is kind of a balance commentary, and I think if you do this value right and you make kind of all your units feel overpowered but balanced, then you kind of avoid this last thing. I think oftentimes when you have more junior designers that are very analytical and very math-based, they get very scared of too powerful abilities or too powerful of units. And they want to spreadsheet everything down, and they want to do like nuanced kind of balance. It's like, well, what if we just increase their damage by 1 or increase their damage by 2? Well, why don't you just increase it by 10 and then look at the other side about increasing their armor by more? Like really celebrate the big differences between units, because otherwise you're going to end up with a game, either an army game or classes, where everything kind of feels the same. And you can high five each other and say it's balanced, but is it fun? Probably not. All right, so the next value is concept of concentrated coolness. So this is another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with the make everything overpowered. Where you really want to make sure that the things you make, be it units, classes, or whatever, really have the right cool mix of abilities that make them as cool as possible, but also pure. Like this is really a value about kind of the purity of purpose of the units or purity of purpose of the classes. You don't want to just add a bunch of random crap onto everything until they're cool. It's like, what are the cool things that you want for these classes or these units? And I've actually used this slide before, but I find it funny because this is like what we did for Warcraft 3 Heroes when we're trying to take them and make World of Warcraft classes. So in Warcraft 3, like, what's the numbers these days? I think we had something like 3 heroes per side across 4 races, so we had like 12 different heroes plus a whole bunch of different units. And we really wanted to use the Warcraft 3 heroes and units as a way to feed the World of Warcraft classes. So what we did was we kind of, rather than in World of Warcraft having, let's say, 12, 15, 27 classes or whatever, some games might do, we wanted to have just a smaller number of classes that were as cool as humanly possible. So rather than having a Mountain King, Blade Master, and Torden Chieftain class, we took all 3 of those hero units and kind of took their abilities and then combined them all into the warrior class. So that was kind of an illustration of how this worked, taking some of the Warcraft 3 stuff and turning it into WoW. So, and also the other thing is that there's only a certain amount of complexity that players can generally process. It's like they really want to be able to look at that unit or that class and have an understanding very quickly of what those things can do. Or if you have a game like an RTS game, it's like, how many units do you want in the game? Is the game really better if you have 30 units per side, or an MMO better if you have 30 different classes? Because when you're on that PvP battlefield and you need to recognize an opposing class and instantly be able to think in your head of what that class can do and what I can counter them, there's kind of a limit to how many of those things that you're going to be able to process and be able to do. So this kind of next picture would be the opposite of concentrated coolness. Which I think you kind of see in a lot of design, right? It's like, we're just going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this class because we throw enough crap into it, it's going to be cool, right? So we definitely don't believe in that. So talking about, one of our fail examples is the World of Warcraft vehicle system. And it wasn't a fail because the vehicle system was bad. On the contrary, the vehicle system was really cool. And we actually created it very specifically for this zone called Lake Wintergrasp. Something we always wanted to do in WoW but didn't have enough time. And finally in Lich King we got to do was we wanted to have like sieges. We wanted you to be able to like have siege vehicles and, siege castles and fire catapults at each other. And we finally got to get to that in Lich King. So, we created this whole vehicle system, feature that we could do. And, but the cool thing about the feature was it really allowed for all kinds of types of gameplay that we couldn't do before. Because now that we had vehicles, we could do things where you could ride dragons that had all different spells. We could do all kinds of cool stuff. And the problem is that, if you give a really powerful tool like this to a bunch of really, really creative designers, well, they're going to take advantage of that. And they're going to probably start doing quests on vehicles. They're probably going to start doing dungeons where you now have to drive vehicles. They're going to do raids where you have vehicles. And in Lich King, I don't know, we must have had like 100 vehicle quests and dungeons. And it got so confusing to people. Like you go on the next vehicle quest and you're not even using your class anymore. Like we take all this time doing this concentrated coolness concept where you learn your class and you learn how to play them, and then we plunk you into a vehicle where you don't use any of your class abilities and you're just using these 5 new abilities that you now have, 5 seconds to maybe a couple minutes to figure out how to play basically a whole new mini class. And, I think we just took it too far. It was a really cool system that allowed us to do things that we probably should have taken a little bit slower. So probably where I think we succeeded, and I put the question mark because obviously StarCraft 2 isn't out yet, so we'll see whether or not we succeeded or not, is how we approached designing the units for StarCraft 2 as opposed to the original StarCraft. So I call it the 15-unit rule, but obviously if you count these up, you're going to see there's 16 on the list. But the reason it's just called that is because when we looked at Brood War, most of the races had around 15 units. And we felt like, we looked at StarCraft and we just felt, that felt like the round amount of units for that sort of a game. For that sort of fast-paced game, that sort of RTS, we felt like we had the right amount of complexity. So we had the right amount of complexity, then how do we approach the sequel? Do we just keep all the old units and then decide to just add a bunch of new ones also? Well, no. We had this idea where for every unit that we added in Star 2, we had to kill a unit from StarCraft 1. And it was really difficult to do, actually. It sounds easy to say, but boy, when it's a unit that you loved as a player or you loved as a developer, the last thing you wanted to see was for it to go away. And that's why we really had to be disciplined about it and really have a rule about it. So, and we had to do a whole bunch of different things. Like one of the things that we did to try to keep ourselves on track and make sure we're making the right decisions was we'd go to all the developers in the team and make them make a list. Take all the units from the original StarCraft and put them in order of the first unit on your list should be the unit that if we made a Protoss race or we made a Terran race, you could not imagine a sequel without race in it. So, with something like the Protoss race, maybe the Zealots, you're number 1 on the list. Maybe the Carriers number 2. And maybe down at the bottom, it might be something like the Dark Archon, right? And that was one of the ways that we figured out which units should go and which units that we really wanted to keep. All right, so the next concept is play, don't tell, which obviously is kind of a play off the old idea of show, don't tell. But we're game designers. We have games. So, I don't think it's really so much about the show. It's more about the play. Can you have game mechanics that by themselves kind of allow the player to experience the story? And use things like text, voiceovers, and movies to enhance the story, but not to drive it. And I think some games do this better than others. And obviously in Blizzard's history, I'll show you the examples where we didn't do as good of a job. But this is, probably more of an an aspirational goal for us. We're still trying to get better at it. But, if you look at like World of Warcraft, it was not an accident that we only gave our quest designers, 512 characters to do quest text within. All of our quest designers, are storytellers. They really want more text, but we felt if we put the constraint there, then it would really encourage them to try to make, quest mechanics that you played more than you actually had to read. So a good example of where we didn't do such a good job is Diablo 2 quests. So in Diablo 2, it looks like the movie's not going to play, so that's fine. So in Diablo 2, the way it worked is that you would go up to a quest giver and they would just chat at you. They would do a monologue for about 2 minutes plus, and you would just sit there listening to them kind of espouse about the story and talk about the background. And the quest mechanic ultimately is just go kill this bad guy, right? So if you just go, kill Duriel or you go kill Andariel, that's the actual objective. And along the way, you're just killing a bunch of random monsters and collecting random loot. So there really wasn't any story attached to the game mechanics themselves. Another place is the Green Hills of Stranglethorn quest. How many of you guys have played this quest? Yay! So for those of you that haven't, here's the way the quest worked. So you would go to this zone called Stranglethorn, and in Stranglethorn there was a random chance that any monster in that zone would drop a page for this quest. And there were actually, let me count this up right, there was 15 different pages that you would collect, and those pages would turn into chapters, which then you would combine into the final story. So, the theory behind the quest was that you would do all these different quests in Stranglethorn, like Stranglethorn had like 50 different quests, and then as you were doing those other quests, you would just slowly accumulate pages. It wasn't intended that you would just try to go out and get just this quest done. But the thing is, when you get a quest in your quest log, you want to get it done there. This whole theory that you're somehow going to do quests in the background while you do other main quests just isn't how players actually behave. So the way that people actually played this quest was they would just go to the auction house and buy all the pages, which really didn't quite work real well for telling a story. So where I think we did better was Warcraft 3, and actually in our RTS games, we really try hard nowadays to really have the game mechanics be the story and be something we did well. So the first thing that we did in this mission is calling a Strathhome, which for those of you that maybe have only played the WoW version, it actually originated as a Warcraft 3 level. It was Human 6 in Reign of Chaos. And it was a really cool mission, and obviously we turned it into a WoW dungeon because it was such a cool mission within the original game. And you would start with a mission briefing. I obviously just put out there, don't do a bunch of text, but sometimes you need to. We had a mission briefing, and it's probably a little bit too long in this one. We were kind of getting really excited about our own ability to make movies at this point, and I think our mission briefings were a bit longer than they should have been. But after that, though, you had this whole idea where you had to kill these infected villagers. So you had to go into the town, knock down these houses. Villagers would come out, turn into zombies, and you had to kill them. And one of the things that was cool was on the opposing side was this demon lord called Mal'Ganis. And he was doing the same thing. And the idea was that you had to kill the villagers in the town before the bad guy collected them all into his undead army. So just from looking at the leaderboard up there, knowing that Mal'Ganis was doing it, just through the game mechanics, you really can understand kind of a certain amount of the story that's going on. And then you had the ability, to temporarily stop Mal'Ganis. So if you went and stopped him, then it would be tougher because you'd lose some units fighting him. But then you'd get 2 minutes of time where you could go into the town and kill as many of the plagued villagers as possible until he came back. And then ultimately, you'd win the mission, and Mal'Ganis would run away to Northrend. And I think this is a really good example of what we try to do in each of our RTS maps. We really try to make sure that we always say what is the gimmick around this map, and how does that key into the story? And and sometimes we come up with a really cool map idea that we create a story around, and sometimes we'll have a story that we have to design kind of map gimmicks around, and they really try to interlock. So another example where I think we did a pretty good job was actually in the Death Knight starting area in World of Warcraft. So this was all about, what if we could tell your class story and do it just through quests? So when you started, you actually start by getting quests from the end boss, the Lich King, Arthas. And then we really try to make sure that there's quests where you play the story. We have like for example, if you're going to get your Dreadsteed, we actually had a quest where you have to steal the horse and turn it into your Dreadsteed. We really try to make sure that those quest mechanics were things that are building you up as a Death Knight and teaching you what your abilities were. We really took that opportunity to teach you the story, let you play the story, teach you what your class was, and teach you kind of where you fit within the WoW universe. And then probably one of the coolest things that we introduced was this technology which we call phasing, where we start doing these things within the zone where as you do certain quests, the zone around you actually changes physically. So you can see that you're actually plaguing out the zone and taking over this area that used to be beautiful, and you're actually laying waste to it. And we would actually change the zone around you, which is something that I think MMO players always kind of want. They want those dynamic world that you get to affect as a player. And then at the end, you rebel and join a player faction, and that's kind of the whole ending storyline. And you really feel by the end of it that you understand who you are as a Death Knight, you understand why you change sides, and a lot of it really isn't through reading the quest text. One of the things that I try to tell the quest designers is, if you make a quest and players don't read any of the quest text other than the objectives, would they have a basic understanding of what the story was? And then after that, you use the text to really enhance the story. And really for those players that want to seek it out and want to get a deeper, lore-rich experience, then it's there for them, but it's not necessary to enjoy the story. All right, so next one I call Make It a Bonus. So this is going to seem super obvious. Players respond better to incentives than they do to punishment. But the thing is that us as designers, we always seem to go punishment first. We always seem to reach for the stick. We always seem to be like, well, what's the death penalty? It's like, because we have to punish players. We have to do these things because we have to encourage them to do things the way we want them to do them. Well, I kind of had this weird eureka moment during World of Warcraft, and it all centered around this game system that we put in called the rest system. And the way the rest system worked is that after you've been in the game for X number of hours, we would cut down your experience, so you're only getting 50% of the experience that you originally did. And we really were just trying to have a system where we really wanted to encourage those couple hours of play and discourage the long grinding that people would do, right? We really wanted people to have that great experience the first hour, couple hours, really feel like they're advancing fast, and then slowly kind of discourage them from staying in the game really longer, because we wanted people to engage in the game for an hour or two every day rather than have to do 16-hour marathon sessions. So the beta players universally hated this idea. They thought it was like the worst system ever done. And they, are screaming bloody murder, want us to take it out of the game. So I tried something. I took all the underlying math of the experience curve in the game, and I doubled it so it would take twice as long to get there. And then I flipped the rest system the opposite, where when you started the game, you would get 200% of your experience, and then after X hours, you would just go down to 100%. Everyone thought it was the best system ever. The exact same system. But they thought it was great. So, it was really this big learning experience for me going, okay, well, maybe every time that we have a punishment system, especially a system that players really, really hate, is there a way to turn it into a bonus? So, we really, and this kind of comes into gamer psychology, where players are going to find the path of least resistance. And like when we all played EverQuest. In EverQuest, players want to advance in level, and they want to get experience as quickly as possible. So what you'd do is, for whatever given level you were, you would find the easiest monster that would give you the most experience, that you could kill the most times in an hour, and you would just do that, because that was the path of least resistance. So when we got to WoW, we went, well, what if the path of least resistance happened to be the most fun way to play? And that was really one of the core kind of moments that we had for designing World of Warcraft. And a lot of what we did with the early quests, everyone kind of makes fun of the collection quests and the kill quests, but if you kind of go back into your head of what it was like when you were playing EverQuest, we just were trying to move you around the zone, because we imagine if you're playing a game like EQ, and we at least told you after you killed 10 crocs, well, why don't you go kill 10 gnolls now? So at least you're kind of moving around the zone, and you're trying different things, and that would be a so much more satisfying and fun experience than just killing the same thing over and over and over again. Another thing that, this is probably another, maybe we succeeded, maybe we didn't, but we learned a lot about Diablo. In Diablo, the way that you would go in combat is you would load up your inventory with health and mana potions. And when you're in combat, you would just keep on using those potions over and over and over again, because that was, again, kind of that path of least resistance, and there's a good, there's also a real positive to that system in that, players didn't have downtime. And that's so much of the fun of Diablo, is that you're always killing stuff. You don't have to stop. You just keep on advancing in the game, and it's so fast-paced. But we really didn't like kind of this potion spam, have all this stuff in your inventory. So what we're doing Diablo 3 is, we still have potions, but they have cooldowns on them, so you just can't use them over and over again. But in return, what we've done is we made the monsters actually drop down health globes. And, we've seen, obviously, this mechanic in a lot of console games. But, we felt like, well, if the most fun way to play is to be killing monsters, then let's give you the health from killing the monsters. So you still have that same fast-paced action, but you don't have to load up your inventory with all potions just to be effective. Another good example is the inspect message in WoW. So in the beta, whenever you inspected somebody, it would actually give you a message. So you would know that someone's inspecting you. And this is, actually a screenshot. So, someone, and all they could do is look at your gear. I mean, there was no downside to this, right? It's just, I could go and look at your stuff, and, because I'm curious. I want to see, wow, that's a cool cloak, and I want to see maybe what it is, or that's a cool piece of armor. But player psychology, if you tell me that you're inspecting me, then I get kind of creeped out about it. It's like, why are you looking at me? What are you going to do to me? It's like, I don't want you in my backpack. So, and everyone wanted us to take away the inspect feature. Get that feature out of the game, Blizzard. Well, instead, we just took out the inspect message. So we kept inspect, but now we just don't tell you about it, and everyone loves it. Same system. Another example, this gets a little designery, is kind of the concept of randomness and kind of what we've done to approach it. So I think just about every game that I develop that has some sort of random drop in it or random chance for a spell to go off or something like that, at least once a week I have a developer come to my office and tell me the random number generator's broken. We need to look at it. And it's because they hit a streak. And I don't know how many of you guys are math whizzes or understand the concept of randomness, but the thing about randomness is that it's random, and if you flip a coin 100 times, there is actually a chance that you're going to get 100 heads in a row. I mean, it's statistically improbable, but it can happen. And maybe you're not going to get 100 times in a row, but when you start thinking about collection quests, yeah, it's actually possible that you could kill 10 monsters and not get a 1 in 3 drop. And it's going to happen, especially if you have 1 million players playing the game. There's always people out there that are hitting those bad streaks. So what we kind of thought about is, well, rather than me arguing if everyone comes to my office and giving them that speech of here's how randomness works, because I understood too that I can't ship in everyone's box and be on everyone's shoulder and say, no, that's randomness. We just decided instead, why don't we just model randomness after the way players think randomness actually works? So what we do now is we try to have these progressive percentages in the game. We don't have them everywhere just because of database problems, but where and when we can, we try to make it so that each time that you kind of take that crack at the apple, you have an increased chance until it gets to 100%. So it still feels random, but we've gotten rid of all those really nasty streaks so that it more matches players' perception of how they think randomness works. Okay, control is king. So game controls are the primary way that players interact with your game. And you really want controls to be as responsive as possible. Or at least we feel that way with the games that we make. Again, I feel like this value matters so much more with multiplayer games, because you really need those fast responses. So, you really want to take your time and try to get it right. And the problem with this value is this will put you in direct opposition with other parts of your team. And the examples I'm bringing up here is probably the examples where the animators are going to hate me. Because, animators want to do really cool, awesome animations. And like the first example here is originally in World of Warcraft, one of the things we wanted to try out, like currently actually, the way that you mount in World of Warcraft is you just, click on an item and then a puff of smoke appears and you're on a horse. Not real realistic. And sure enough, we're all game developers, so when we first put that in, everyone thought it was retarded looking. Like, why should we do that? So why don't we do it more like, like Zelda, where, you call your horse and your horse just kind of comes off the horizon and gallops up to you and you jump on it. That'd be cool. And we actually mocked it up. But the problem was it took several seconds for the animation to play out, and if a rogue just jumped on you and tried to stun lock you and is up your butt, you probably don't want to watch your horse, kind of galloping over the horizon after you. So, in the favor of gameplay and control responsiveness, we're like, what? We're cool with the puff of smoke. We'll deal with the break in reality. Other examples, a lot of the abilities in WoW originally in the beta were on next swing. Where you would actually click the spell, and then the next time, your character's turn, combat turn came up, you would do a really cool, awesome animation. But it just didn't feel responsive. So we try to tear out as many of those as possible in the game so that when you clicked a button, an actual action happened, even if, it kind of caused some weirdness with the animations. And then another good example is standing up. We used to have a really cool animation for when you stand up, but again, when you press that forward key, your expectation is your character moves forward. Or when you press the turn key or you switch the mouse, your character is going to pop around, but that's okay because responsiveness trumps cool animation. Okay, so another really good example is in Warcraft 3, during Warcraft 3 development. And one of the reasons why I call this control as king is it's really up to you guys to get this right. Because very often players are never going to comment about this stuff, unless your controls are just horrifically bad. But most of the time, controls are pretty good. They just might not be, really anally fine-tuned. So one of the things that happened during like Warcraft 3 development was, I'd be playing the game every day, in the development, and it always like the cursor just felt a little laggy to me. And it was funny too because really no one else. I asked other people on the team, and they'd be like, "No, I think it's okay." And I'd be like, well, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. And I'd go to my programmer and I'd be like, I think there's some lag in the mouse cursor. And he'd be like, no, it's fine. I've looked at it. And we had this conversation on and off for about 3 months. And he finally got sick and tired of me coming into his office. He's like, okay, fine. I'm going to put in, a background hardware cursor so we can see if there's any lag in the cursor. And sure enough, there was 3 frames of mouse cursor lag, which then we identified and were able to get out of the game. And no one's ever going to comment about that. You're never going to see a forum post, thank you for fixing the 3 frames of mouse cursor lag. You're just not going to see that. But it's so important because if you do all those things really well, your game's just going to be incredibly responsive. And, what it's going to lead to is things like this. In StarCraft, 1 and 2, because our controls are so responsive, we can have players that can do, like 50 to 70 actions per minute is kind of is about how many mouse clicks that kind of your average player in StarCraft does. The pros actually do over 400 actions per minute when they're clicking around the map and clicking on units and giving commands, which I think equates to something like 6.5 clicks per second. But if you had that lag in there, then that just totally blows this whole thing out, and you're not going to have pro gaming. You're not going to have all those sorts of things. And I guess another example that's outside the gaming industry, is like Google will spend tons of programming time just to shave milliseconds off their search results. And again, it's because they know it's such a differentiator and it's such a feel thing that the faster those search results are, the more that they're going to get people. Again, it's not that you're going to go there. You're just going to know over time that Google always seems fast and it always returns what I want, so that's why I go there. All right, so next concept is tune it up. So, we talk about tuning all the time at Blizzard. How is this tuned? What's this going to be tuned for? And it's one of the easiest things to do, because we have all these parameters, all these ways of tuning our game. But it takes a lot of time. And one of the first things you got to really do is plan for your tuning hooks. And this is actually a screenshot from the World of Warcraft editor, of you want to make sure that you have all the parameters that you want to be able to tune. Is it hit points? Is it cooldowns? Is it acceleration? Is it turning radiuses? Is it, whatever it is, make sure that you plan for the hooks. Because when you first put in a feature or a unit or whatever, you're going to really not know exactly how to tune it, and you're certainly not going to tune it right the first time. It's going to probably be, it could be years before you get everything tuned right in the game. So make sure you have all the hooks in. Make sure you have the hooks that you need to balance the game. And then really importantly, know who you're tuning for and why. Like, where I think tuning probably fails the most is not figuring out who you're tuning for ahead of time. It's like, are you tuning this for a casual player? Are you tuning this for the hardcore players? Because oftentimes you can't do all of it. And like one example would be World of Warcraft. When we were first doing WoW, we always had the concept of dungeons. These dungeons where you have 5 players, and it'd be a much harder experience. Either it'd be class interdependencies. We had tuned it, a little bit more difficult, so you had to be a little more hardcore to play it, and we were very specific about it. And oftentimes, we'd always get, can I just have the single player dungeon, because all those areas are so cool, and I just want to experience it as single player. But you just couldn't tune it both ways, and we were always not able to deliver that kind of single player dungeon because we were really tuning for a very specific, customer and very specific audience within the game. So where we failed was probably like the Brood War campaign. So Brood War, we really couldn't figure out who it was for. It was really challenging. Was it for StarCraft veterans? Should we assume that you had finished the original StarCraft campaign? Was it for brand new players? Was it a challenge for players that beat that first campaign? We didn't know. So we had to make some assumptions. So we assumed that you had to know the basic mechanics and how to play the race. And we actually back then didn't have the ability to do difficulty modes. So it ended up being a much more hardcore experience. The Brood War campaign was really, really fun, but if you weren't an experienced player, you couldn't go very deep into it, So where we see it was probably like World of Warcraft, and I think, we had a lot of philosophies behind WoW, and one of them was we wanted every player to be able to solo to level 60. And And we wanted to match the level curve to the actual content, which was a pretty difficult decision actually. But we found really early on that if you ran out of quests and you had to kind of resort back to that, grinding monster experience, the game just felt broken. You ended up with the empty quest log, And everyone said that if we made the level curve too easy, then people were going to play the game, get to max level, and just quit. Where we really took the opposite stance. We said, you know what? If the game is really fun to play to level 60, they'll play it again. And, that's exactly what happened. And this is a screenshot of, just kind of a typical hardcore player in WoW that has multiple level 80s and multiple characters. Because it was so much fun to play the content the first time through, it didn't feel like a grind. It didn't feel like, wow, I would never do that again. And again, it's one of those counterintuitive sort of decisions where, it was so much faster to level up in WoW and previous MMOs. And, the assumption was that we weren't going to have staying legs. But it was so much fun that people would just do it again. All right, avoid the grand reveal. So this is one of my favorite values. So this is really about getting feedback early and often. I think there's this natural tendency as creative people that we want to make something perfect before we ever show it to each other. It's like, because I don't want obvious criticism. I don't want you to think I'm dumb. I feel like obviously it's not very good, so I don't want to show it to you yet. But the problem with that is you kind of get this emotional investment. You really, especially if you spend months on something. If you spend a lot of months and then you show it to somebody else, at that point you're probably not looking for feedback anymore. You're just looking for a pat on the back and some approval. But the chances are that there's issues and there's things that could make it better. So we really want to try to encourage all of our people to show their work early and often. It doesn't matter if you're an artist, programmer, or designer, but use the people around you to make your stuff better. And it's really a cultural thing. If you can't build that culture, then it doesn't really work. And you really want people to feel like it's safe to fail early. And it's really about, I know there's something wrong with what I'm showing you. Can you help me make it better? That's really what you want the message to be. And that's really what allows for iteration and really allows for, kind of that teamwork and creative collaboration to happen. So the example where we didn't do such a good job of this was actually Silver Moon City. So Silver Moon City was one of the major cities that we put in during Burning Crusade, and it was massive. It was so massive that we had to build it in parts. So we had built it in parts, but it was so much pain to try to weld it together and put it into the game that we'd only do it occasionally, like maybe once or twice during over a year. And since we never did that, we could never really see it and play it and iterate on it. So it ended up, being a very beautiful city, not a particularly playable city, which really led to this now we call it silver mooning anytime that someone does something like that. And I'm sure all of you have your own sayings and things in the studio, but avoiding the grand reveal and silver mooning is definitely one of ours. But it's kind of one of those Titanic moments. You learn from it, and that's another thing too. Embrace your failures. I know there's probably some Blizzard people in the audience that's probably cringing at me showing this because this was such a painful experience. But you know what? It actually is okay, because now that we've done that, we learned a really valuable lesson, and this is not the last game we're going to make. So I feel like kind of embrace your failures, really learn from them. So where we succeeded was probably Arathi Basin, which was one of our battlegrounds. So this was the game design document for Arathi Basin. Which might look like some, Atari 2600 tank game or something. But this is where we started, And what we did was we worked in layers. We took that and we this is like a more early version, but this is a fully playable version of Arathi Basin. And then we would just, as we played it, we can move things around quickly and prototype it. And the level was always playable, and then when we got to the end, it ended up being one of our best battlegrounds and one of our fastest battlegrounds to make. All right, culture of polish. So there's kind of this idea out there that the reason that Blizzard polish is better is just because we get 6 months at the end. And obviously we're very fortunate to get more time, but the polish doesn't happen at the end. The polish happens all along the way from the very beginning. And this is like a picture of just an early WoW zone that we did up on a whiteboard. and we would sit in front of this thing, changing it and modifying it, and, we were trying to do a finished design there. Once we put it into the game, we're already polishing and trying to change things, so it really happens all along the way. If you just leave it to the end, you're not really going to get there. You're going to be able to do a little bit of layer polish, but if you really want that, really fine-tuned, polished game, you got to do it all along the way. And one of the tricks to this is you want your team to be making their favorite game better. And that's how you kind of get that culture, because again, this is really about a culture of it, not just how to do it. And you really need your whole team to be on board with polishing their game. And the best way to do this is make sure the people on your team love the game they're making. Because I remember, we had a programmer once leave the studio after WoW, and he eventually came back to the studio, and one of the things he told me was, I really want to come back because I play WoW every night, and I want to be back on the dev team so I can, fix all the shit that's wrong. But if you have that passion and you got really creative guys, that's where the polish comes from. A singular person cannot do it. And then one of the things we do at Blizzard is this concept of strike teams. It's something we've been doing forever and ever, and it's been very successful for us, where once, the game gets far enough along, we will take a cross-section of developers from the other development teams, and we'll take artists, programmers, designers, we'll take new players, experienced players, a whole cross-section, and we will give them play assignments. And they will play the game and give lots and lots of qualitative feedback. And we'll run the games through the strike teams until we get all the polished feedback and we feel really good about the game. And we really feel like getting all those perspectives, especially developers' perspectives. But it's really important, though, it's not the people on the team. Because the people on the team have gotten too close to it. Because you've played the game 100 times, and now the game's too easy for you, so you want to make it harder. Because you're trying to make it for yourself. And that's why it's really important that you get people from the other teams. And if you need to keep on doing this, then you might need to replenish the strike team with new people once they get too close to it, too. And then lastly, every voice matters. So this is an actual Penny Arcade comic from a guy that actually was on the World of Warcraft forums. It was really funny. But, this is kind of your typical aggro guy in the forums, right? And it's really hard to read, the Blizzard forums sometimes, especially as a developer. It can be tough. But the thing you got to realize is that if you have people that are that passionate about your game, then you're doing something right. And even if they're swearing at you and getting mad at you, they probably have a point with their feedback. So try to remove the emotionality from it and really take it as they're trying to make your game better. And then lastly is don't ship it until it's ready. And this is probably the most important point, right? This is, what we always say now at Blizzard, right? Anytime the press asks us when the game's going to be done, well, this is the tagline. So thank you very much. So I think I went right to the end, though, so I don't think we have time for questions, though, so I don't know. Someone will hopefully tell me.
We have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Any questions? I don't see anybody at microphones, so I must have done a good enough job.